In this module, we're going to start manipulating some of the geometry and using some of the fancy ArchiCAD strategies to do so. And a lot of these are straightforward, and some of these are a little secret, and I hope that you get something out of this. Let's start by looking at a couple of these figures I've drawn. And I'll start by using Shift. I'll select these lines. Now, once I've selected 3 lines, that's going to change what tools come up in this little pet palette, as it's called. And we can move this pet palette around. This is our move tool. This is our rotate. This is our mirror. We're going to talk about multiply in a minute. But what I want to talk about first is, for example, this one. We can insert a new node. So we can take that 1 line and make it 2 lines. And in fact, we don't even have to have multiple lines selected to do that. Just 1 line will allow us to continue to branch out and do extra lines. If you want to delete one of these, one way to do it is just to overlap the nodes, and it brings you back to where you started. However, some of these tools will only show up when you do have multiple lines selected. For example, this offset edge, which is something you're going to use all the time. As soon as you have 3 lines, at least 3 lines selected, I'm able to offset that edge. But not only does it offset that edge, but it changes the length of the attached lines as well. So, and I can type in an explicit value. This is a feature you're going to use all the time. We have different ways to put arcs. We can go from an arc, and if it's an arc, we can then go straighten it out using the insert node. We can do an arc with third point, or we can also do with tangent. If we select multiple points, we can do an offset, and all the lines that are selected will offset a specific value. Lots of really handy. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Notice when I undid it, it made those all selected, which is a nice feature, because then I can repeat another command. I can also square that corner off using that third tool. So play around with that. The pet palette's really fantastic and something you're going to want to get comfortable with. Let's talk about this multiply command, which is, and if you're using my shortcuts, it's Shift M, or you can pull it up with the pet palette, and it's right here. This is a fantastic, very powerful, basically in other CAD programs called the array tool, but it's one of the best I've seen. So if I want to use the drag and just move things or copy them, I have 4 different options. I can increment and spread. I can just increment, I can spread, and I can distribute. None of this makes any sense until you actually go to play with it. So if I select this one, what I'm going to do, it's going to say, okay, notice down here, this is a good time to read reference point here to here. And then once I determine the spacing, then it's going to allow me to continue to place those as many as I want, which is very convenient. Joists may work well for you if you want to do 16 inches on center. Control Z that, Shift M to try this again. Now in this case, I'm going to do an increment, and then but I'm going to key in the exact number I want to copy. So I'll come here, I'll do my translation vector, and you can see it's going to make all those copies for me and work something like that. I can do a spread, and this is my favorite for joist. Now this isn't a joist, but I can go 16 inches on center, and I can just keep going as far as I need to. And the last one is distribute, and a distribute -1. I'll show you the difference. So the distribute is go from here to here. I'm going to spread out 12 different elements within that length. Click. Similar, we have rotate, elevate, and matrix. The rotate's going to give us the option to something like this. The elevate's going to it doesn't really work with a 2D element, but we can do the same thing in the Z dimension or the Z axis. And then matrix, I'll show you real quick. We're going to go here, and then it's going to give us another spacing in the other direction. So that's very powerful. The multiply tool is a little tricky. I can't explain it all. There's too much little subtlety to it. The only way to master it is to practice it. The one last thing you're going to want to pay attention to is this rotate, and we'll demonstrate that real quick. So here is a rotate where it's rotating around the circle, but it's taking the element and rotating it as well. The alternative is no rotate, and you'll see that the element's going to stay in the same orientation. And then a new feature that has been recently introduced is the randomize, where it's going to be random. And if you're doing trees or something like that, you might find that that's useful. So that's the rotate the path. Play with that. I think just knowing that it's there will keep you out of trouble. This vertical displacement, you have the option so that every time an element's copied, it will actually move it up in the Z coordinate as well. Again, play with it and you'll find that it's pretty easy to use with a little practice. So that is the multiply command. We've looked at the pet palette, how to manipulate the edges, but now I want to get into some other things that are just as fun. Let's try the split tool. So I can take these lines, and if I hit S for split, or I use this tool up here, I can draw a vector and then select a line that is my cutting line or my split line. And then you look down here, it says, which side do you want to keep? I click that side, and that's going to pre-select it. And I can just click in the white space if I don't need to select it, or sometimes why I want to select it is I want to delete it. So I can kind of trim things using the split tool, or I can just add nodes. So the split tool works very well, especially on fills, slabs, and roofs, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. Now the trim tool is really easy to use in ArchiCAD, and all I need to do is hold Control, and it will delete the edge between the next adjacent intersection. And it's super fast to go through and just clean up some geometry. Notice I'm getting some arrows. I'm going to hit Control A, and I'm going to select the arrows on and then select them off. And then I'm going to pick up the properties to make sure that's my default. So all new lines will be without arrows. So that is the trim tool, and that's a pretty fancy way of quickly eliminating some extra lines that you may not need. Another way to do that is to, if I have multiple lines, and here's a good use of the split tool, I can select all of these lines, hit Control, and select that edge, and now it's going to delete. So that's sort of a split trim type of operation. So let me do that again. All of this is very dependent on everything being in just the right order. So I'm going to select the lines. I'm going to hold Control and select the cutting edge, and then I can hit delete. And the ones that are going to be selected are always the ones that are on the shorter side. So if, for example, if I undo this, if this line were to be this stretch tool, I'm going to do the same thing. Select line tool. Has to be, the line tool has to be on. I don't think I mentioned that, but the line tool needs to be selected. Notice this little element became selected because it's the shorter of the two. So it was this one, this one, this one, and this one. Something to keep in mind. Let's do that one more time because it's a little tricky. If the line tool is not selected, then it was just going to trim. If the line tool is selected, then it's going to do a split. So make sure that you don't make the mistake I just did. If I want to trim between two elements and not the nearest intersection, I can select the trim points, and then when I hit Control without the line tool selected, that's going to trim between the selected line. So I select here, and then I trim between the selected lines. And all of this is very, very subtle, very dependent on the order in which you do everything, and it's just going to take some time before it's second nature. The extend tool works similarly. Let me move this line, so I'll select it, hit F5, move this up. I'm going to select these. I'm going to have the line tool selected. I hit Control on this edge, and they all extended up to that new edge. And I can just keep changing what I select to. Now here, when I did that, it became a cutter, which is a very powerful tool. I'm going to undo that and okay. So practice with those little tricks because you'll find that it really speeds up your drafting. Now, there's a couple of tools that are buried in this edit window and under, where are they? I think I need to select them first. Reshape, adjust. And adjust works similar to the tricks I was just using, except it's a little bit more explicit. So it'll extend those to that line. It's a little less cranky. I don't have to have the line tool selected, for example, for that to happen. Hit reshape, adjust, select the line, and it adjusted. If the line is down here, my cutting line, I can use the adjust again and select it and make them all shorten to that line. So that's the adjust. Now, I like the adjust tool. I'm going to create a shortcut for the adjust tool, and I might as well show you how to do that. So if you recall, my tool to make a shortcut is Shift Insert. So I just hit Shift Insert, and now I'm going to go in here to the alphabetical order, find adjust. Is listed with A for adjust. Here it is. And I want that to be Shift I. And that's because intersect is I. I'll show you that in a minute. And this is like a super intersect. So I'm going to remember it with a Shift I. I'm going to assign that, and then I'm going to hit OK. And so now I can select these lines, Shift I, select the edge, and I don't have to go up into those keyboard shortcuts, which are a little bit tedious, or not the keyboard shortcuts. The keyboard shortcuts are awesome, but the selecting from the pull down menus is tedious. So the intersect tool, if I select two lines and hit I, it will just bring them to a point. Use it all the time. If I want to do a fillet or a chamfer, I hit F and I key in the value, and there's a nice 1.5 inch fillet between those lines. So that's with F. So I makes a corner, F makes a fillet or a chamfer. It'll bring up that dialog box. So that's something you're going to want to use often. Now, something that other CAD programs do a little bit more fluidly is, or explicitly, I should say, is the offsetting. So if I want to offset in general, I have a couple choices. If I'm going to offset a single line, I'm going to select the line, and I do a copy or a move. I select on the far side, opposite of the direction. I move to the line till I get a perpendicular, and then I key in the value. So that is an exact 2-foot offset. And even if I wanted to offset this, I'd hit F9, come down here, wait till I see the perpendicular tool hit 1.25, and that's 1.25 feet. And I can measure with M to confirm that, yes, 1'3". And that's the best way to offset a single edge. If I want to offset multiple edges, for example, like this, then I can go to this offset all edges. I can hit Control or Control Alt, and I can do copies or multiple copies. And that's the best way to offset multiple edges. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo, and that brings me back to where I started. So that's the best way to offset. So we looked at split, we looked at trimming, we looked at fillets and chamfers, intersects. We used the adjust tool. We've done a lot of nice geometric modifications here. And I encourage you to play with these techniques and understand how they all blend together, and you'll see that these tools work, these strategies work, yes, with lines, yes, with circles, but they also work with walls and slabs and everything else. And you'll see that ArchiCAD has a great way of finding the consistency between all of the different elements that you're going to be creating to design your buildings. Till then, we'll see you in the next module.